This is Mr. Nic Easley. Nic is the CEO and Managing Director of Multiverse Capital and is a globally recognized cannabis industry expert. He is also the founder and CEO of 3C Consulting LLC, the nation's leading strategic cannabis consulting firm. Nic and his team have worked in 16 countries, 34 U.S. states, and 2 territories, assisting nearly 500 cannabis companies across all sectors of the industry. He is a committee or board member for multiple cannabis industry organizations, including a board member for ASA, Americans for Safe Access, which is a favorite of mine. Nic recently educated delegates on medical cannabis at the UN Intergovernmental Expert Group meeting, which is super impressive. And he consulted them on international challenges posed by the non-medical use of synthetic opioids. Nic has received many prestigious industry awards and is a veteran of the United States. Thank you for your service, Nic. With that, please help me welcome Mr. Nic Easley to the show. Nic, the floor is yours.
Super. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully this technology works well. I think you can see I'm still in my COVID beard contest, so a little different than normal, and being able to adopt a different type of suit coat up here in the mountains of Colorado. So really appreciate the time, everybody. Great speakers before, great to see Bob and everyone kind of getting together. We have less time that we're wasting on our commutes and so forth, and a lot of time to focus on this industry. And you know, what I've seen, even being involved with like some of those first legal grows back in 2014 here in Colorado, and how this has proliferated around the country, around the world, the galvanization of this plant is awesome. So I'm going to go into a couple of things like what I consider the real hemp industry to be. A lot of people have really dreamy thoughts and opinions of like, I'm going to start a CBD wellness brand and it'll be for pets and like CBD dryer sheets and on and on and on, like we could all go over and have seen. But really making things real from a viable business model as well. Having hemp investments and a very specific strategy in that, it's not just like first emerging markets, we're gonna do a big hemp field, tons of CBD, and then be able to bulk sell that and partner with Martha Stewart, and now we're in Coca-Cola and Walmart. Like, there's many steps to get there. The great data on that last presentation, a lot of mine comes also from like hemp benchmarks. There's a lot of good commodity like spot data out there of like, what are the true market prices? And if you're still in your financial models saying it's gonna be like $10,000 a kilo for CBD in 5 years, I mean, it's maybe a tenth of that to 20% of that in most markets. Just as a little disclaimer here, so I never get in trouble. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant, managing director and CEO of Multiverse Capital. So we deal with like Reg D regulations. But this is all based on like over 14 years of legal business experience in this industry, from the first medical markets through adult use in our hemp markets. And even though it's CBD and it's legal, you know, even you might not know why it's legal, have good legal. It's so important. Most of the problems I've seen with clients in the past, like not structuring their IP correctly, their operating agreements, their leases, their contracts, their budgets. So really good legal, really good accounting, really good guidance, mandatory in this industry to really succeed. So I've been in this for about 14 years from farm country in Wisconsin. Was lucky enough to actually see this plant grow in the Midwest and in hemp fields already, and it's kind of taking over. But as I've really gone forward to see what this industry is, I've kind of realized like, where is this? But I had to understand like where we came from. You all remember like Reefer Madness and kind of like the background of where this is, but it's still, when you think about controlled substances and unregulated controlled substances, even if it is legal under the Farm Bill and the Agricultural Improvement Act and like going through the USDA, it doesn't just mean you can do whatever you want now. There are still rules, they're still being formed, they're still being interpreted around the globe. So it's really your responsibility to know what you can do under your state's Department of Agriculture or like your country's Departments of Agriculture. That might not be the same as what you need to do with like your departments of health or for processing food products, or so making sure you have all of those sorts of licenses. But this is a lot more risky than most people realize. Yes, we have many more banks for hemp than we do cannabis. I mean, there's over 700 total now in the US that are doing this, and it's getting more and more available and less predatory. It's no fun to pay $4,000 to $5,000 a month in some cases, and 2% on cash deposits to deal with this, or how predatory some of the payment processing solutions are for even selling hemp-derived cannabinoids online, where normal supply companies of ours, maybe 2 to 3% for like credit card transactions, being able to see like 6 to 9, like there's cost to doing business in this, but you have to really know where we came from. And hemp was really why this was all made illegal in the first place, I feel, and it's really been shown. So when we see like what's happened here, like, wow, in the last 6 years to imagine what this first provision was under state departments of agriculture and institutions of higher education being able to, experiment with some plants to now hundreds and hundreds of different varieties. But with 47, nearly 48 states almost soon to have like very specific types of laws and language, and then federal laws on top of that, it really is a big opportunity. But whenever there's a huge opportunity, not just even talking about in COVID times now, there's going to be a lot of people that come out for this. And if you can make 17 times more per acre than corn or soybeans, you're like, what the hell am I doing in that? And that's why many states, what's great about this is we were always this like black sheep, like the medical cannabis industry, the adult use cannabis industry. But then as this started to progress and change, and hemp became a part of this, people that would have never have been a part of our conversation or dialogue jumped on our bandwagon board, and it's all the same plant. Yes, if you have high pressure liquid chromatography instruments, you can analyze that and test that and know what certain percentages are of those cannabinoids, but it's still the same plant, and we got to honor that and move forward as we do this. But we have to know, like, if you don't make viable business models, this is it's just a dream. And it's been a beautiful dream, but I've seen nightmares along this path to where, it grows, people see these big upticks, but then you look at other aspects where, like, why is this the first year in many states that they're planting less acreage? Many people had no idea what they were doing in the beginning, weren't doing soil tests, didn't get the right varieties. Any of the original people in Colorado probably could think back to, I'm not going to say names of companies or individuals here, but selling seeds for like $10 a seed and saying this is, even back then, it was like, this is 4% CBD, this is 8, this is 10. And they turned out to be crappy Chinese paper varieties. And then once you're doing, or they're just pissing hot, like testing hot over 0.3% THC, and it wasn't the varieties that people thought they were getting. So people literally bet their farms on these magic beans and seeds that they paid way too much money for to not actually get what they anticipated getting. So that the genetics and the stabilization of genetics has really progressed leaps and bounds over this last few years. And there's some great new companies coming out with that. But we're starting to see some changes now. I mean, just like Bob said, with the FDA, USDA side, I'll get into novel foods a bit more on the EU side, but this plant's been growing around the world for a long, long, long time. And now as countries are opening up for economic opportunities, I constantly see, though, that people just think it's legal. I don't have to follow anything when it comes to food processing, correct labeling. We've had clients we've had to do compliant labels in 50 states, and it's different in each state how they're labeled. You can't just do a pop-up online store and try to sell some new product. It has to be a quality product. And this is the sad thing, is being like a disabled vet and like knowing, like, if you're injured and there's some sort of medicine, like if someone has cancer or something, they'll do anything. And people were selling fraudulent, untested products that were actually dangerous for years. And finally, with some of those warning letters from the FDA, it kind of like woke some people up that you can't just do this in your garage and buy a few things on eBay, mix them together, buy a bunch of hemp seed oil and call it, CBD oil. And like, if you're buying these products at gas stations or other places, it's probably not the best place, but like, look at those labels and think about what some of these companies are selling. And that really underscored that there were hundreds of great companies in Colorado and Oregon, Washington, all over the country that were doing this well. But even some of those larger Kentucky consolidation plays, they didn't consider some of this guidance, or they didn't have good legal structures for how they raised their capital, and it caused them to tank for what we thought there might actually be. So thinking about the oversupply, currently there is an oversupply based on the demand and the proliferation of products. Because, as we move forward, I mean, many of the products that people are making, they're not following any of these guidelines. And then it turns out that they can't sell these. And when I think about all of the products that were in the EU, these like hemp stores and like CBD cafes, they're just, if you've been to Amsterdam, if you've been to Prague, just everywhere. Like, I love the one where it was like payment processing loans and like also selling CBD. And you're like, oh, wow, great new buzzword. But novel foods is much more important than anyone really realizes when it comes to making food supplements and products. And we talked about this for years as this was being interpreted, of how novel foods would change European produce and also the ability to import certain sorts of products to those markets. So if you're in the European space, this is much more serious than you can imagine. It takes time, it's expensive, and it's like adult stuff. And if you're trying to do products, like, they'll be shut down, they won't be able to be carried by big box or any sort of distribution channels. So you have to think, what's the most compliant level of certifications or processings standardizations that you need to follow to sell to your hardest import market. And when we think EU, it's been going on for a long time, but some of the massive plays that are happening in China, some of these other countries, Canada's been producing for a long time, but many of the things there were for the current market and current desired products. Now, this is what people think about. Thank you. Like, I love how, I hope someone would laugh. This, a good friend of mine made this meme recently from Wake and Bake. And it's like, there's a new cannabinoid on the street. It's like, wow, it's not just THC and CBD. There's hundreds of these. And we're barely beginning to study these, but I mean, even CBD prospectors in 2018, like it's gonna be the next one. We have to get ahead of this. But there's so many cannabinoids, so many types of companies. But when you think of like Manitoba Harvest, or if you're buying hemp hearts or something in the United States, most likely it's coming from those companies. They were purchased to like add positive things to balance sheets for some of those large overinflated public companies in Canada. But these millions of uses, when I see that all the, like we're gonna build the houses out of hempcrete, carbon sequestration, all these great things, they're really lacking about $250 million in the United States of infrastructure investment and development for the decorders, the redders, the processors, the massive industrial 1,000-liter CO2 and ethanol type instruments. They exist, they're expensive, and you need to have quality biomass coming into them. And if you're going to go into some of these new channels, just know it's not about trying to like create something. It's like, how do I make something that's for a positive exit from like my IP, or what can I sell to Dow, DuPont, like Monsanto? Sorry to say it, but that's the exit that investors are looking for. You having a hemp farm in Tennessee and growing 20 acres and doing some CBD processing in some barn, and then you're gonna bulk offload it to someone else. Well, there's about 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 other people thinking that exact same thing. And they have been for years. You're late to the game on that, and the game already exploded. So what's gonna differentiate you as like a potential exit strategy, and knowing your cost, knowing your genetics, having stable genetics, and realizing that hemp farmers, just like, you know, from childhood, it's like how you bond together with other farmers to be able to get into other new markets. Otherwise you're selling to your neighbors, and they all got tomatoes too. So kind of like in conclusion here, it's like, you don't want to CBD me right now. I love that meme, but most current businesses are going to fail. I know that as an investor. I know that having worked with hundreds of hemp operators, when they call with problems, and before you get into problems and have to deal with them, plan your operation. Realize this is an agricultural commodity, as stated, and there are seasons. There are agricultural vectors, there's cost components, there's force majeure act of gods, of tornadoes and crazy hailstorms or grasshoppers. So you have to get ahead of these things with planning and have an option to get this to market. Because if not, you're just producing a bunch of a product and it doesn't make sense from a viable business model. So I'm not sure if there's any time for questions at all. Just really pleasure to meet all of you virtually here and share my wonderful new luck. And wishing everyone some good success out there with this plant this year.
Nic, I just had a super quick question for you. When we were looking into getting into hemp, one of the things that I was consulted on when it came to credit card processing is to get multiple processors, because we had a situation, I think it was last year sometime, where the credit card processors just stopped taking hemp money, and a lot of people had no way to collect money. What is your opinion on that? Do you feel people should have more than one processor when getting into the hemp industry?
Well, more than one anything. I think COVID more than anything taught us that we cannot be reliant on single supply chains for anything that's vital to your business model. So be it your seeds and someone not being able to deliver your 100,000 clones on time, or your greenhouses, or your payment processing, you always have to have redundant systems in these businesses. I mean, we've seen companies shaken to the core over something like that, or running out of the packaging, like someone mentioned. Like when you look into like Sana Packaging, some of the other new ones coming up that do great hemp products that aren't the Chinese varieties, I mean, they just are able to capture major new market share. So with payment processing, there's also some aspects with where they're located and the taxes that can go into that. But there's plenty of them now. So negotiate your best deal and always have a contingency for any single point of failure.
Thank you. That is such great advice and a wonderful talk today. It was really great having you, Nic.
Thanks, everybody.